Good afternoon. My name is Greg Lockwood, and I'm the Stakeholder Coordinator of the BC Centre for Employment Excellence. On behalf of my colleagues at the Centre, I would like to welcome you to today's webinar. For those of you who are not familiar with the Centre, or CFEE, it was created in 2012 with funding from the provincial and federal governments to act as a research and knowledge-sharing organization for BC employment service providers and employers. The Centre's mandate is not only to do innovative research, but also to find ways to share that knowledge and best practices with BC practitioners and employers. We created this webinar series as a way to reach out and connect with practitioners. Through the series, we have been highlighting new research by the Centre, but also tapping into the knowledge and expertise within the employment services community. You are invited to view the video recordings of previous webinars that we have posted on our website. The topic of today's webinar is Making Sense of Career Labor Market Information, or LMI. In today's session, Denise Lloyd of Engaged HR will share some intriguing concepts and resources to apply LMI in real-world situations in order to improve the career development process. Denise Lloyd is the founder of Engaged HR Inc., a human resource management consulting firm dedicated to providing HR services to the nonprofit community. Denise has been contributing to the BC employment training sector for the last 20 years and has held leadership positions in nonprofits, small business, and global corporations. Denise is also the founder of CareerDevelopmentConnections.com, a free job posting site dedicated to the career development industry. Before I turn it over to Denise, I should note that the presentation will last approximately 45 minutes. Due to the time constraints, we will hold off on answering questions until afterward. At any time during the presentation, please use the questions feature on your dashboards to submit any questions or comments you may have for the presenter to address during the discussion period, which will be facilitated by my colleague Sean. There will also be 2 interactive polls during the presentation, so keep an eye out for those. We are also recording this webinar, and we will post the video on our website, along with a link to the presentation slides, with further opportunities for everyone to continue the conversation with the presenter, Denise, and other practitioners. And now, it is my pleasure to hand the mic over to Denise.
Thanks, Greg. So I'm just going to share my screen so that you guys can see my presentation. So thanks so much for having me here today. I'm thrilled to be able to chat with you about making career sense of LMI. And this is a great presentation for us after having presented at the Career Development Conference in March. I was part of a panel that you guys did around LMI. And so it's great to be able to continue the discussion and to share some further information. So thanks for having me today. So I'm going to just tell you a little bit. Greg gave you a little bit about my experience. And so as I was mentioning, this is Engaged HR, and so if you're interested in picking up the slides for today's presentation, I know Greg mentions as well that they have the presentation available on their website as well with the slides and the handout, and that there'll be a recording of the webinar available after the fact, and so Greg will wrap us up with that at the end of the day today. But if you're interested in getting the slides now, in case you can't see what we're going to talk about, then those are available to you on my website as well. So that's engagedhr.com/slides/LMI. So I'm going to just dive right in with a poll. So is that something, Greg, you're able to pull up? What we wanted to get a sense from you in the webinar was what percentage of time you spend sourcing LMI in a week. And so this is time that you might be on websites, in books, and looking up different types of information, that kind of thing. So I believe that Greg's opened the poll, and we're looking for insights from you on what percentage of time you spend sourcing LMI. And Greg, is that poll open?
Yeah, it's open, and we're climbing to about 70% of the participants have voted. So I'll close it in maybe another 15 seconds or so. We're up 76%.
Sure. What are you seeing? I don't see the poll. So
you don't see the poll. Okay. So we've got 23% that are at 0 to 10%, and the majority, 52%, spend 10 to 25% of their week sourcing LMI, 21% between 25 and 50, and then 4% between 50 and 100.
Awesome. Thank you. That's helpful. So thanks, everybody, for giving us your insight there. That's helpful for me to know just sort of where you're spending your time with LMI, because for many of you, it's not your full-time job. You are not burying your heads in websites and stats and data and graphs and charts all week long. That you are spending a percentage of your time, majority of you upwards to 25%. And my assumption is that that's being used in career resource centers and in perhaps any kind of workshops you're running or any kind of one-on-one time you're spending with clients as a case manager, that you're sitting down and talking about LMI with them. And to be able to do that, you need to do some sourcing. You need to find your stats. You need to find your information. And so that's where you're spending your time, a percentage of your time. So thanks for that. That's helpful. Now let's dive in and let's start talking about what is LMI and what are some of the different ways that you're using it and how do you make career sense of it. So just to give you some history on how I got involved in this and where this information that I'm about to share with you today comes from, is there was originally a book called Making Career Sense of Labor Market Information, written by Elaine O'Reilly of the Canadian Career Development Foundation in 2001. And CCDF, Canadian Career Development Foundation, is an organization out of Ottawa that over the decade, 2000 to, well, even to now, has been producing career-related materials, and Making Career Sense of Labor Market Information was one of those. And 2001 is a very long time ago, and so in 2010, Aspect received funding to revise and to update that document and that publication, and they contracted with Engaged HR to do that. And so I worked with myself and two writers, Don Shell and Flo Poo. She and I worked together on rewriting the Making Career Sense of Labor Market Information. And what's in that document, it's now available as a PDF only. You can't order the hard copy anymore, but you can get the PDF on the Aspects website and the link to the resources there. And there's 5 areas of material in the Making Career Sense. It's over 100 pages long. It's looking into what is on LMI, what are themes and trends, the evolving world of work, what kinds of sources of LMI are there, and of course implementing good practice. It's an excellent resource. It has lots of great information, and so I do encourage you, if you haven't seen it before, to go to the Aspect website and to download that publication, because it's definitely going to be helpful for you. So let's talk about what is LMI, because that is the cornerstone of both our conversation today, but also as you are working with your clients and sourcing LMI information, it's good to know just, well, what is this exactly? What do we mean when we talk about labor market information? So what is LMI? Well, the labor market, as I'm sure most of you know, given the amount of time you're sourcing this information, is where we're really talking about supply and demand. And so we're talking about those who need labor, which is our demand side, and those who supply labor. And when they come together, they are joined by that wonderful thing called price, which is your wages, your compensation. It's the total package of what's in economic terms referred to as price. So LMI describes the conditions of the marketplace, and it takes a look at that marketplace from a data-driven point of view, from both past and present, and then also there's lots of information out there about future projections. So you'll hear all kinds of information and all kinds of projections around where things are going with the labor market, and whether it's nationally, internationally, nationally, provincially, or even in your own local community. And, you know, we'll talk a little bit about the challenges of local LMI, because that is often one of the biggest challenges. It's all great to get Canadian information, but it can be quite difficult to get local LMI. So we'll talk a bit about that as well. So let's break this down a little bit further and just look at, you know, LMI associated with demand. What does that mean exactly? And so that's where we're looking at things like employment rates. We're looking at hours of work. You know, are we seeing things, higher demand for part-time workers over full-time workers, over contract workers, over seasonal workers? All of those kinds of things are playing a role in our demand side of the LMI. We're also considering things like the skills and education, credentialing requirements. You hear lots of information in LMI related to labor shortage versus skill shortage. These are all related to skills, education, credentials, and job vacancies, or the demand for jobs. And then LMI on the demand side can also get broken down even further into talking about occupational projections. Where do particular jobs, particular industries, where do they see themselves going in terms of demand? Is there high demand, low demand? There's the classic example of, the tech sector. You see high demand for developers. You don't see so much demand anymore for typewriter repair people. That, the LMI is showing, and as we all know, the demands are changing. So that's the focus on demand. LMI also has a focus on supply. And so supply is made up of a different kinds of focus. Demand is talking about the employer side. The supply side, now we're talking more about the workers. So where do the workers live? How many hours are workers wanting to give? What is the skill level and education level of the workers? What are their characteristics, their age, their gender, their specific population groups? Anything that's related to the actual worker is the supply side. Employers have the jobs, workers have the ability to fill the jobs. So the employers are the demand, the workers are the supply. And the demographics is a huge component of that. Now, we also talked about price. So this is always a challenge. Using the word price when you're talking about people and work is always a bit of a, can be a contentious issue. But really, when we're talking about price, we're talking about all the different components that go into what employers are willing to pay for the work they need to get done. And so they're willing to pay a price. And that price are things like wages, salaries, any benefit programs, like your health plans, your time off, your pension plans, all the usual things that you see within the workplace. Once employment moves from voluntary to paid, there's all kinds of things that make up that paid component. Some of it's things like, the costs that come together, like technology costs, professional development costs as well, that those can get added into price. Just depends on the kind of LMI that you're looking at and what different components of LMI people have put into their analysis and their data. And we're going to talk today about what are some of those key questions you need to ask to make sure that you're clear on what you're looking at when you consider demand information, supply information, and price information. So I wanted to start out with just kind of those 3 different components of LMI so that we had a clarity around the different pieces of those. And now I'd like to talk about how those relate to the people who are consuming LMI. So your consumers, which is really the who's asking about LMI. And so we have another poll, and we'd like to know who you are working with when you're sharing your LMI. So, you do your sourcing, but you also do sharing. So let's talk about who you're sharing LMI with. And we've got different options there. We've got young people or youth, unemployed adults, employed or underemployed adults, prospective immigrants, and all of the above. And I will talk about each of these categories, who they are, and how they might be using LMI. But let's just start with the poll. So I see the poll's open. Greg, do you have some results for me?
Yeah, the results are coming in. We're at about 65% voted, so maybe we'll give it 10 more seconds or so for people to answer. We don't have the all of the above option, but maybe I'm sure folks are probably answering with who they're primarily working with out of those 4 groups. And right now it looks like 10% young people and youth, 63% unemployed adults, 19% employed or underemployed adults, and 8% prospective immigrants. So mostly 62% unemployed adults. Right.
Well, and depending on your definition of youth, that you just never know what that means. But yes, that's great. And that's what I thought, that, a majority of people in the EPBC programs, which I understand is a great deal of people who are registered for today, that you are working in that component with that type of clientele. And so it's good to know that that's an accurate assumption. I didn't want to make an assumption that was not correct. So let's talk a little bit about when you're working with these people, what does that mean? What kinds of reason would they want LMI? Excuse me. So when you're using LMI, we're going to talk about with each of these groups. So with young people or youth, they need good LMI because they might be making some, lifelong education and training choices, or they might be trying to decide between, is it best for me to go to school right now, or is it best for me to take advantage of a skill set that I have and go into the labor market? LMI is really helpful for them to make those kinds of choices, because LMI does include information about schools and programs and education choices as much as it includes information about work and where the jobs are. Sometimes where the jobs are is dependent on what education you have. And so young people, youth, they need that LMI to help them make those choices. Now, unemployed workers, again, the majority of people that you're working with, they benefit from LMI because they're looking for work. And they need to know sort of how their education and skills fit into that. Do they need to do some upgrading? Do they need to do some academic planning? Or can they transfer their skills from one sector to another sector, or from one job to another job? And so the unemployed worker is very interested in LMI from the where's the jobs. Where's the jobs? How much do they pay? What's the demand? Is it a long-term option for me, or is it a short-term option? And so lots of unemployed are looking at LMI from that perspective. Then, of course, we do have employed workers. You may not see many of them in the EPBC programs, but we do still have employed workers who are wanting to build their careers, who are wanting to move from one level of a position perhaps to another level of position. And that's where LMI can become very important to them as they take a look at their own career management and their own career pathing. And it can make a difference to them to know some of the kinds of information that you're finding when you source LMI. And then the last component we have there are the prospective immigrants. And I wanted to bring them up because just to sort of raise people's awareness that LMI is valuable to people whether you are sitting in an office at an EPB center, whether you're sitting at home on the internet trying to figure out, how to move from the job you're currently in to a new job, or if you're sitting in, a house in a different country, in a different place in the world, and you're considering coming to Canada. And so that LMI is also valuable to people, and reliable LMI is important. And, a lot of prospective immigrants are relying on our government for that information. A lot of sourcing that people are doing on their own is information that they're making decisions with. And some of that time, some of those people you may actually find in your office, and you need to help them break down and understand the LMI that they're looking at, because sometimes that's not always easy to do. So the reason we break this down and want to have this discussion about why people are using LMI, what's the value of LMI to them, is because there's a real belief that everyone will do better if they can base their decisions on really good LMI. And so the more that you source really good LMI for the people that you work with, the people you might come in contact with, the better decisions they will make. And so there are some key questions that you want to make sure you're asking as you look at LMI, because you are the conduit. You are the ones who have to take all of this disparate information and all of these different things and make sense out of it. And it's important to remember that with labor market information, it's not always about how much information you have, but the quality of the information. And so it's important to think of LMI in terms of quality over quantity, particularly when you work with people who don't necessarily know what questions to ask when they look at LMI. So we have some key questions I want you to think about when it comes to your sourcing of LMI and what you're going to do with that LMI. And in the handout that's available for download, that I noticed Greg's mentioned it as well, the website address is on the chat of the panel for the webinar, and it's also in the slides itself. And so there's key questions to ask. Inside that handout, the key questions are broken down even further, and so they've got lots of really good tidbit questions to ask you. But I wanted to give you the overall questions to think about. So the first is, where has the LMI come from? So you want to make sure you're looking at reliable, valid sources, that you're looking at LMI that hasn't been funded by a particular group, that was designed to make sure that they looked good in the outcome. Environmental groups are an example of this, where you can get development companies funding research on, oh, there's so many thousands and thousands of jobs in a particular sector, and it's all designed to make sure that their environmental action goes forward. So you need to make sure you've got valid sources coming from LMI. That's just one sort of loose example of that. You want to look at how the LMI was collected. What kind of questions were asked? Who asked the questions? Was it, a statistically valid collection process? Ask yourself, do the claims seem reasonable? If someone is saying, typewriter repair is coming back, obviously that might not be a reliable, valid source of LMI that you're considering, because the claim seems a little unreasonable. Because you are smart people, you look around, you see what's going on in our world today, and so some of the LMI claims that might be being made out there, something just doesn't seem right here. Trust your knowledge and instincts on this and dig deeper. So you want to make sure that there aren't other factors that are maybe playing a role in why a claim is being made. As someone who's sourcing LMI, you also need to look at the research and, what was the research that was carried out? When did it happen? Is it super recent? Is it, really old? If you look at some websites, for example, and, the last time the page was updated was 2003, then, you may say, things have probably changed since 2003, and so probably not the most up-to-date LMI for me to look at. So, we all go to Google, we all ask Google questions, and sometimes where Google takes us doesn't necessarily mean it's the most recent research that's been carried out, and we need to look a little deeper, find more recent stuff. You also need to see if the research that you're looking at, that LMI you're sourcing and that you're then handing out to clients, is it echoing, or is it connecting to any other sources of information, or is it sort of a standalone, out there on its own, making a claim as the results of a research study? You want to make sure it's not contradicting other research that maybe comes from a more reliable source or a more mainstream source that has good statistic validity to it. So you want to dig deeper. You don't want to take everything at face value, and you, as the expert in LMI, your clients are coming to you trusting that you've asked these questions about the information that you're looking at. And it's not just a photocopy off a book or, a print off of a website that you haven't really taken a good look at and made sure that it's answering some of these key questions. So when you're reading LMI, when you're reading a report, the handout has these questions and even more deeper questions to ask yourself, particularly if you're putting something together that a client might be looking at by themselves, and they may not have an opportunity to talk to you for you to explain what they're looking at. Then asking these questions and really trusting the information you're putting forward to your clients becomes really important. Now, sometimes you meet with clients and you get a little resistance. You get a little, you know what, I don't need any of this mumbo-jumbo stuff from you. I just need a job. And we've all had clients say that because clients want to work and they want to get out there, and taking time to look at LMI isn't always top of their list. I know when I was a career practitioner, people would come in and say, I just need a resume. If I just had a resume, I'd go get a job. However, the person saying that to me was living in their car. They, hadn't showered in a week. There was no way that a resume was going to be what got them a job. We had other things we had to take care of before the resume was going to be the answer. Well, LMI is not that much different. Sometimes people say, I don't need LMI, I just need to find a job, and they're not looking in places where the jobs are because they're not taking time to really look at things. So the next time they say, I don't need LMI, this handout that you're going to download, and I'm going to go through some examples of, is going to show you exactly how different types of information can address job and career search questions, so that information overload doesn't necessarily take over, and the opportunity for people to see the value of some of that LMI can kick in faster. Because the sooner they see value of it, the more the resistance will drop, and they will start to see that there's actually some good stuff here that I need to pay attention to. So I encourage you to grab the handout, but I'm going to give you a couple of examples. So the first example I have here is that if a client is wanting to or needing to develop a realistic return to work plan, there's certain types of LMI that you want to go to, right? There's thousands, millions of web pages out there that are LMI oriented. You want to make sure you're going to the right stuff to hit the right concern so that there's quick value as quickly as possible, or good value as quickly as possible. So in this case, this is a classic, what you're probably doing a lot with clients is getting that, let's get you back to work as quickly as possible. Then you're looking at job requirements. You're looking at working conditions. Because the other thing, maybe they have physical limitations to the work. Well, if they aren't clear on what the working conditions are of the kind of work they're going to look for, then they may not be successful. And so wanting to make sure they're considering that as they look at their plan. They're considering the prospects for employment. They're considering potential employers, and that you may have an employer database that you're able to access in your center, and so you want to make sure that that LMI is being used as they develop their plan. So this is one example of how a concern has certain kinds of LMI that you want to go to. For example, in this case, you're not really looking at educational needs, depending on their return to work plan. If they already have all the education you need, you don't need to sit them down in front of educational and college calendars and make sure that they're looking up education requirements. So you want to match their concern with the type of LMI. Another one is to find out where best prospects for employment lie. So where are the opportunities coming up? There's a whole list of different types of LMI here for you in terms of how you want to link the kinds of jobs they're looking for with the kind of information you have available. So some things in here might be if you can get hiring rates from training programs, if you can get, the job ads over the last 6 months, have there been any in this kind of job or industry this person's looking at? Do you know of employers who hire these particular workers? What are their outlooks look like? Has their business been growing or shrinking? Those are the kinds of LMI pieces of information that's going to make the most sense for someone who's trying to figure out, what are the best prospects for me right now in a particular area of employment. These were the two kind of most obvious concerns or issues that came up from this handout, but what you'll find I think there's about a dozen different kinds of concerns or issues. So it might be to understand employers' recruiting strategies, or to explore career paths of something they have no transferability in, to measure job expectations against conditions of the local labor market. So those are all examples that are on this handout that then link you to a variety of different kinds of LMI information. So this handout and these kinds of examples and stories, they come out of the Making Career Sense of LMI documentation, out of the publication itself. And so I wanted to share that with you to give you a sense of what that publication can do for you, because we can only fit so much into a 45-minute presentation, but also so that there may be some good nuggets for you, some triggers of things that you hadn't considered before in connection to a particular concern of issue. Sometimes the most obvious isn't always the most obvious. So maybe some new things that could connect you to the type of LMI that you want to connect to a particular issue. So that sort of covers what is LMI, what are some of the sources of LMI that you might use with particular people or with particular concerns or issues. And that's all focusing on the components of labor market information and the types of information that you can pull together. And one of the challenges that comes up with all of this and with what we're talking about is that it's all about information. And labor market information is more than just information. Information is potentially overwhelming. Information overload, we've all experienced it, we've all had it, and it can be paralyzing for people. So I also want to introduce a concept that's taking LMI and reframing it a little bit, and it's a different way to assist your clients. And it's about making sense of the information. And this is a concept called labor market intelligence. And it's not just about information, but it's actually making sense of the information. So labor market information is very descriptive. It's your stats and your graphs and your tables and your charts. And it's the things that personally, for me, make my eyes go cross-eyed, and it makes me feel overwhelmed and can make me feel quite inadequate and at times quite ill-informed because I don't know what to do with all this information. So instead of labor market information, I want you to think about labor market intelligence, because labor market intelligence is where you take all this information and you interpret it and you make sense of it, and that's what your clients really need from you. They can find the same websites you can find, or some of the same websites. Your research skills will take you a little deeper than they can, but they are looking to you for more than just go to this website, go to that website. They're looking to you to help them understand it. And labor market intelligence is where you take all this information and you summarize it and you analyze it and you do some forecasting and you interpret the information to aid them in understanding what they're looking at. Because once they understand what they're looking at, they can make better decisions. And that's really what you want to provide as a client service. As a client service, I'm not sure that what you really want to provide is just a whole lot of information. It's a tool. It's a service, but it's not the outcome. The outcome you want is people making great career decisions. And those career decisions and those job search decisions come from labor market intelligence. So I want to help you understand what labor market intelligence means and how that works with you. And I'll just, before we move into that, I'll give you an analogy for this. So one analogy that you'll see in the Making Career Sense of Labor Market Information is a baking analogy. And what it says is it talks about, I could give you, a whole bunch of ingredients and tell you, oh, I'd love for you to make me a cake. I don't give you a recipe. All I do is give you a bunch of ingredients. I don't tell you how much. I don't tell you what to use. I just give you a bunch of stuff and say, here's what I'd like you to do with this. And what you're going to get is you're going to get a hodgepodge of results. You're going to get a bunch of different people doing a bunch of different things, and it's not necessarily going to come out good. It's not necessarily going to come out well, and it might not be something you want to eat. Versus being in an environment where not only are you given ingredients, but you're given a recipe. And you're given, some description of what this is going to look like and how this can come together and what it is you're trying to get to at the end. You're actually perhaps given a picture, or you're given a sample of something that you can actually see and something that you can actually say, this is where I'd like to go. And you're given the recipe on how to get there. And you're interpreting what all these ingredients just in and of themselves are, but you're actually interpreting them and say, well, you use a little bit of this and a cup of that and one of these and an egg, and you do these different things and you'll end up here. And so it helps the person who has to figure this out know where they're going and a bit more of the specific steps on how to get there. So part of labor market intelligence is being skilled at taking a look at all that information and interpreting it so that clients can understand it. And it's a part of your job as an investigator. It's a part of your job as you take a look at all this information and you interpret it and you figure it out and you become really good at seeing what's not necessarily written down, seeing what's not necessarily in front of you, but making interpretations. The interpretations is where your skill set really starts to shine. So let's talk about what that looks like. So you're seeing the big picture. So I encourage you to become more engaged in your local community. This is also where you will start to see and to get a sense of the local labor market versus the big national picture that doesn't actually tell you enough. But if you can see the big picture and you can look at themes and demographics and economic themes and organizational themes, you'll start to see things emerge from events going on in your community. So for an example with this, it might be that you start to notice that post-secondary institutions are beginning to offer more courses in business training for new entrepreneurs. It's just something you notice because that's what you do. You pay attention and you notice things. And so you might notice that you're seeing more business training happening for entrepreneurs in your university. You don't do anything with that information necessarily, but you notice it. So then you get into the taking a look at economic trends, where you might see national or provincial trends that are having an impact on your local labor market. So for example, maybe a leading employer announces layoffs in your community. another interesting trend, another interesting event that you're paying attention to. And you start to kind of put these things together and perhaps start making some interpretation. When you are looking at a big picture, you also have to look at the ripple effect. And the ripple effect are the things that are impacted by events that are happening. And they can be both positive and negative ripple effects, but it's important to pay attention to them. So let's say in this community where the employer announced major layoffs, maybe a ripple effect is that you notice that there's more home-based businesses beginning to open up in your community, that people aren't moving from one large employer to another large employer, but there starts to see this trickle down of people starting to do more home-based business. You're making an interpretation, you're paying attention to what's going on around you, and you're seeing some of these connections. So then you notice there may be some needs, and this is where you start to make the interpretation from information, economic outcomes and outlooks, to events, layoffs happening in communities, to what could this mean from a local labor market point of view, and what does it mean in terms of opportunity for your clients. So this is where your clients need you to do some interpretive work. So from this example, you have college programs offered to entrepreneurs. You have a major layoff in the community, removing people from big company. You have starting to see a trend of home-based businesses opening more and more of. Those grads from that program are starting businesses. So perhaps your clients have some services they can offer that aren't traditional employment, that aren't necessarily, go and get a job, but perhaps it's a way to enter the labor market differently. So maybe they're addressing the needs of these new home-based workers, and maybe they're doing it through construction or home office renovations or from catering business, or they're offering web services. Maybe they're becoming an entrepreneur themselves. If that's not possible, maybe they're going to construction companies because they're going to start to see a boom in renovations versus new home construction. Or they're going to go to cleaning companies because cleaning companies are going to start getting into residential, or small business is going to start to grow because there's more people doing that kind of work in the community than there are doing big business, big corporation work. So it's about making the connections and drawing the pictures, and that's where labor market intelligence comes in versus labor market information, because all of these different things in and of themselves are just pieces of information. When you start making connections and closing the dots together, that's when you start getting into labor market intelligence. So as you share intelligence, the same way when you share information, you have things you need to think about with your clients. So you need to be able to make sure that when you're sharing effectively, you're helping clients relate the information to their own situation. The same way that pieces of information is only so good, helping a client understand how it relates to them is only so good. You need to help them see it and relate to it in their own way, and that they're really understanding what you're telling them, and that they're drawing and making their own connections as well, and they're not walking away equally overwhelmed by your intelligence sharing as they were from your information sharing. You need to make sure that they're checking in and that they're understanding what you're seeing. Obviously, you need to make sure that your LMI information or intelligence is appropriate to their ability level and their age. It's not helpful to tell people that, people with PhDs are doing really, really well in particular industry if the person you're talking to is trying to decide between do I finish high school or not. You need to make sure that you're speaking to them at a place they're at, and also giving them a bit of a stretch to where they could go. Following our key questions, you want to make sure that your LMI is reliable and up to date. So going back to those key questions is important. And obviously this goes without saying, although I'm going to say it anyway, that you need to provide information in a manner that shows respect and a genuine desire to help. And that's where the real shift, when I've seen clients and I've seen staff really experience success, is when they've made the shift for clients from sharing information to sharing intelligence. And that's when clients really start to feel like this is a genuine, supportive effort that you're making. And it's not just, well, they shared with me some websites, that you're genuinely trying to help them make sense of all of this stuff. The final thing I want to say before we open up for questions is that as career practitioners, taking time to spend making the shift from sharing information to sharing labor market intelligence does relate to your career counseling area of specialty in the career practitioner standards and guidelines. If any of you are certified, you will find that doing this kind of work and spending time on this effort of going from information to intelligence does relate very directly to your credential and to the standards and guidelines. And so that may help you in terms of your recertification, if you have to do any proving of how you've spent your time or anything like that. I'm not super familiar with the process anymore. But I did want to point out that there is a requirement as a career practitioner to spend time on really making labor market information useful and helpful to clients, and that it is critically evaluated, and that you are doing some good assessment of that work, and that it's not just you know, the quick and dirty, here's a website, go and look at this website kind of service delivery that you're doing. And I recognize that everyone's in, you know, challenging environments where it's not easy to spend a long quality time with clients, that it's, you know, there are times when you're having to do a lot more service with a lot less time. So whatever quick and easy ways you can find to shift information from just being information to being intelligence as well, then the better off all your clients will be. So I encourage you to try and find ways to do that. So just to reiterate that there's an opportunity for you to get the slides, which I believe, as I mentioned, has been shared now, more so than we intended. So please go down to the website and take the handouts and the slides. And of course, I believe Greg's going to run through with you how to get that off their site as well. And hopefully there is a recording of the presentation as well. And now I do want to open up the floor for questions. We are at almost 10 to 1, so we've got some time to answer some questions. And I'm going to pass it back to Greg to manage that.
Great, thanks, Denise. So we're just taking a look at a couple of questions that have come in, but we certainly encourage everyone out there to submit a question. We do have a few minutes, like you mentioned. And I'm going to just pass it over to Sean here, who is going to take a look at the questions and take it away, Sean.
Hi, we're just encouraging people to use that question tab to submit your questions. We do have one question. It looks like we have an international audience member here asking about if there is no available LMI, maybe something that they're not able to access immediately, how do you begin that LMI collection process? Because I guess for them it's a very expensive undertaking.
So I'm assuming you mean if there's no, you know, government-sponsored stats collection, you know, like we have Work Futures or we have large, you know, companies that are putting together different, like StatsCan and all kinds of statistical information. If that material is not available, then it really is about informing yourself about, you know, what's going on in your community, who do you need to talk to, who's in charge of, you know, economic development in your community. Is there someone there that knows, you know, where some new money is coming into the community to build something, or who knows if something is changing in terms of a potential layoff or a potential change in the way work is being done inside your community. Get to know the people who know that kind of stuff in your town or your community, wherever you might live, and, you know, become informed yourself about those local areas. And you know, if there's any educational institutions that you can connect with in your local community, you know, then connect with them as well. It is a bigger task, I would say, that you don't just have internet and you don't just have books to go to, and printed material, that you do have to get on the street and you need to talk to people.
Well, that's a nice lead into the next question. We're being asked, what would be your top source for LMI?
Well, I think it depends on, you know, where you're going, and for who, like, not just where you're going, but who is it you're looking at this information for? I really think that if you're looking at local information, then you need to be connected to your local economic development people, your local chamber. You need to pay attention to where the economy is moving in your community, because I think local is what's really most important to clients. And then, you build up from there in terms of all of your national and provincial stats and those kinds of things. Like some of my clients are in like the construction industry, then I want to know like what's new building permits looking like in our community right now. How many new building permits have been issued? Which companies, which construction firms are getting the big contracts? Are they hiring? Are they hiring seasonally? How are they hiring? I want to, if I can, know those employers personally so I can call them up and ask them questions. So I tend not to rely, but partly that's because I'm not a stats person. That's not how I think. So I tend not to rely on those kinds of data. I tend to rely on what do I see happening around me in my community, who do I know, and can I ask them questions?
That leads into this next question we have here about reliable sources. When you have information that might be contradictory, what kind of methods do you use to determine what is the correct information?
Well, I don't know that there's an exact science to it, and so it's about collecting as much as you can, so not having just one source of information, whether that's a printed material, like you don't just go to one website, and you don't just talk to one person. And so it's making sure that you're talking to people. And I also, if I have conflicting information, then I go to people who are smarter than me about this stuff, and I ask them. So I might go to the CEO of the Victoria Chamber and say, I have these two pieces of information that are conflicting. What do you think? And get someone who knows more about what's going on in our local labor market than I do about the issue that I'm exploring. And so I'm not afraid to talk about the two different sides of the information I have in front of me versus just collecting and collecting and collecting and then trying to make sense of it all on my own.
We have a comment here that it all sounds like quite time-consuming, especially if you're looking at doing this for each client. Do you have any strategies that you use to use your time more effectively and follow a more efficient process?
Well, the biggest thing that I would suggest is that you don't do it alone, that you get your client to do some of this work with you. That empowering your client to learn how to collect LMI is a very valuable task, because they're coming to you at this one point in their juncture. They are probably going to change jobs many times over the course of their career, and so the more you can educate and empower them on how to make this information collection themselves, the more they'll be able to do it in the future as well. So it's an empowering thing to do, to have your client do some of the legwork, go and have the conversations, go and explore the information, or mine the web for whatever information they have, then bring all that information back to you, and then have you help them work through the interpretive process so that it changes from information to intelligence. So don't take on all of your clients and go out and try and do the work of all your clients. Empower them to do the work with you. And I find that they're more engaged with it. They're more interested. They're finding way better information than I probably could, because it's their area of expertise and their area of interest. So they can get quite resourceful, more resourceful than I could or would have time for. So bring your client into the process as much as you can. And then it's, some of the classics, favoriting your favorite websites, knowing what information to read. Is it, what newspapers are you reading, what magazines are you reading, whatever kinds of sources of information, setting aside, an hour a month to, go through the stack of stuff that's on your desk and read through it all, whatever kinds of things you can do to block your time and just concentrate for that one period of time, I find is easier than trying to fit in 5 and 10 minutes a day.
Great. It looks like we're getting quite a few questions about specifics. So I think what we'll do is we'll continue that conversation on our blog once we post the link to the video, as that will be a good chance for us to share basically resourceful links that people might have, good sources of information, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Now, do you guys have do you have a Facebook page or anything that if people wanted to post their favorite LMI sites on your Facebook page or anything like that, that would be helpful for them?
So on
that they could share amongst themselves?
Yeah, on the blog itself, when we post a video, with this, a link to your slides, we'll also have a comment section. So that would be a chance for people to continue that conversation there.
Yeah, so I would suggest if anybody has, certain websites or certain tools that they have found really incredibly useful, feel free. Greg and Sean will correct me if I'm wrong, but I would say feel free to post them in the comments there so that you can share it with your colleagues and so that other people can become aware of some great sources of information that you have.
That sounds great. That's definitely a good use of that space.
Good.
Okay, thanks Denise. Thanks again for your presentation today, and thanks to all of you out there for attending. So just to note again that the session was recorded, and we will post the video of the presentation on our website, as Sean mentioned, and we'll send you the link to that video, as well as it's the same link that you can use to share resources and make other comments and questions. And I'm sure Denise will be happy to make herself available to any questions that you have for her afterwards. So that should come out in an email either late this week or early next week. And I just want to point out our next webinar in our monthly series takes place on December 10th, and that's Building on Knowledge to Support Internationally Trained Workers, Foreign Credential Recognition, and Active Career Advancement Pilot Projects. So just a quick summary of each of those. The Foreign Credential Recognition Pilot Project is designed to help internationally trained workers gain recognition for their foreign credentials. Starting in 2012, 9 immigrant service and support agencies received funding from Employment and Social Development Canada to develop, implement, and deliver a loan program to help ITWs gain recognition for credentials earned abroad. SRDC, the Social Research and Demonstration Corporation, designed and implemented a research framework for the pilot project. So this presentation is going to provide an overview of findings from the 3 years into the project, with a focus on lessons learned and best practices. And also in that same webinar, ACAP, or Active Career Advancement Project, that's the national pilot project, also funded by the Government of Canada. And Success, an individual from Success will describe ACAP and give an overview, which the purpose or the aim of ACAP is to support immigrants in gaining alternative employment that commensurate with their knowledge, skills, and experience. And secondly, to support and assist employers to hire, develop, and retain immigrants. So it works towards a participatory model to address the growing service gap in the labor market, and develop a model of active career support for underutilized immigrants. And so that's a quick summary of the next webinar on December 10th, and the link will be available in that same email for you to sign up for that. So as always, we welcome your input and feedback on the webinars. We would also appreciate any suggestions you have for future webinar topics. And when you leave the webinar, you will be asked to complete a short survey. We would really appreciate it if you would take a minute or two to share your thoughts, as your feedback will help us immensely in planning future events. So that ends our event today. On behalf of Denise and Sean here at the center, thank you and have a great afternoon.